Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're watching this now, and I regret that we couldn't be together today, but I hope everybody was safe and out of the weather. And if just so you know, if I need to momentarily pause, it might be because I have a loud barking dog or otherwise. So thank you for watching online. There is homework for Thursday, so I hope that you can watch to the end so you'll know your homework. It's posted to Blackboard, and I think you'll have everything that you need. If you don't, you can always email Claire or myself, and we'll make sure that we get your questions answered. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to follow a PowerPoint that I created for you all that sadly we couldn't see together today because the discussion for these topics are so important, and I wanted to hear from you, but we couldn't do it. So we will just do what we can with the recording, and then we'll talk through a lot of it on Thursday when we meet. So I'm going to share my screen. And before I do that, let me tell you our topics. We're going to speak briefly on something called land acknowledgments. And some of you already know what those are. And others of you have, there's a good chance you've never heard of it, but we'll talk through it. And there is an assignment. It's due on Thursday before you come to class, and it's on Turnitin. So it is time sensitive. You have to have it uploaded to Turnitin by 12:59 on Thursday. And then we'll discuss what you wrote in class. So thank you for that. And we hate to be so strict on all of these assignments, but again, it gets kind of tough when people are late and sending them through email and we're having to keep up with them, etc. So thank you for understanding. So we're going to talk about land acknowledgments, and then we're also going to look at what does it mean to Native Americans when you talk about what is sacred. So, and everybody has a different definition of that, brings a different perspective to that. So again, we will discuss some of that on Thursday, along with our other lessons, so that we can look at it from a lot of viewpoints. So I'm going to share my screen and we will look at this. And I'm going to go to my PowerPoint. And then I'm going to look at, let's see, let's do my slideshow. So the first thing we're going to talk about is land acknowledgments. A land acknowledgement is I wouldn't say it's a new thing in recent years, but it has gained a lot of momentum in the last 5 to 7 years with institutions of academic institutions, museums, and even public spaces where they are acknowledging that the lands that they operate on were taken, or some people use the word stolen, and but were once occupied by Indigenous people. And so out of respect and honor, there's been a movement across the country to utilize land acknowledgements, especially number one, on websites, number two, possibly posted in public places. And then number three, they're often read aloud in, when you have public gatherings. So recently they had a gathering at the big Houston Energy Center for, I think it was human resources professionals or some professionals in education as well. And I apologize, I can't remember, but they came to us and they asked our help in writing the land acknowledgement for this region. And so that was very honoring, and we were happy to do it. But we want to look at the land acknowledgements that we have in place right now. And there are several links online. I've written Well, I copied and pasted in something from the Smithsonian Institute, the American, it's called the NMAI, which is the National Museum of the American Indian. And they describe what the full force of a land acknowledgement is. And so that's part of your homework to read that online. And we're going to ask you to write a land acknowledgement, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's look at what the University of Houston has written for their land acknowledgement. It says, we would like to acknowledge that the land we occupy today has served as a site of Indigenous peoples, specifically the Atakapa Ishak, Tapalum, Hawiltakan, the Sana Band of the Tonkawa tribe, and Karankawa nations. Only the Atakapa Ishak and Tapalum Kawiltakan nations have survived colonization. What we found, and when I say we, I say Claire and myself, what we found when we looked at that was that that actually wasn't true. In some cases, people have said that the Karankawa nation is extinct. The Karankawa people are extinct. And in this case, it's true to break out the Sana Band of the Tonkawa tribe. And that is a separate, I'd say, people group from the entire Tonkawa tribe, which is not unusual. Tribes often have several bands within the tribe itself. But we wanted to also acknowledge the Tonkawa tribe as its own entity. And we just weren't happy with this one. And we didn't feel like it was well researched and didn't represent the Gulf Coast region of Indigenous people. So we looked online at the Blaffer Museum acknowledgement, and they're the art museum on campus, and they had one that we liked a lot better. It says, we would like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land on which we gather. The city of Houston and the Gulf Coast region is within the traditional territories and unceded land of the Sana, Atakapa Ishak, Akokisa, and Karankawa peoples. We also recognize the native peoples that share the Southeast Texas region, including the Tonkawa and Kawiltakan, and that what we build here today is connected to their histories. Now, in my estimation, this is a super land acknowledgement. It's very thorough, it's accurate, and also talks about the connection between the history and what they're accomplishing today. So that was very cool. Another very interesting land acknowledgement is from Lamar University, which is in Beaumont. And there says, the Center for History and Culture acknowledges that Lamar University is located on the traditional territory of the Atakapa Ishak Nation, and we recognize that the region our university serves includes the homelands of the Akokisa, Badai, Karankawa, Alabama Kashada, and other nations. We further acknowledge that as President of the Republic of Texas, Mirabeau B. Lamar, the namesake of our university, oversaw the forced removal of Caddo, Cherokee, Comanche, Delaware, Kickapoo, Shawnee, and other peoples from their homes. We affirm and respect tribal sovereignty in this land and in all territories. So I thought this was a super interesting land acknowledgement because they are publicly admitting that their namesake of the university was very much involved in dispossessing tribal people of their land and forcing them out at a time when a lot of the tribes were being removed because of the Removal Act of 1830. And so there was a lot of oppression of tribes in Texas. And this individual is named as somebody very responsible for that. And so I give Lamar University a lot of credit for that kind of land acknowledgement. So in efforts to look at how possibly the University of Houston could change their land acknowledgement, I have to say that I have rewritten this attempt several times, and it's not the way I want it. I'm sure Claire would have other ideas, and you all would probably as well. But I'm going to tell you this. This is an all-encompassing land acknowledgement. It's a little longer than probably it might need to be, but there are very important tribes within the state of Texas I'm purposefully acknowledging because of the absence of a broad scale education of Native American or Indigenous education in our primary and secondary schools. And I'm not trying to offend any teacher who has worked really hard to do that, because many of them are very diligent in presenting accurate history, and it's important to them. But Texas as a whole, you know, in the government, government leaders don't find it necessary to even create a standard for teaching Indigenous history in the state. So I've made an attempt to be helpful in that with this land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and honor the ancestral homelands of the Santa, Atacapa, Ishak, Karankawa, Kawiltakan, Tonkawa, and Akokisa nations as sacred land where today we collaborate, learn, work, and grow. We also acknowledge the federally recognized tribes of Texas, the Alabama Coshada, Tigwa, and Kickapoo nations, the state-recognized tribe of Lipan Apache tribe of Texas, and include those who have spanned our borders as vital to tribal history, the Kiowa, Caddo, and Comanche peoples. And that group, before I finish my last paragraph, that group is included because they are federally recognized tribes, but their headquarters are in Oklahoma. So as mentioned earlier, there are other tribes, but this specifically, and for instance, the Delaware or the Cherokee, these specifically were really coming in and out of Texas and Oklahoma a lot. And the Comanche people, even though they're now headquartered in Oklahoma, they were a huge influential force in Texas. And in our introduction to Texas tribes, you'll find out more about the Comanche people. My last paragraph says, we honor all our relations who originated from these indigenous lands and encourage others to connect with both this important past and with tribal citizens among us today. So there are many tribes not listed that live in Texas, are represented in Houston, and live among us. And even though the population isn't considered significant compared to the large demographic populations, the Asian, African American, Hispanic, and white populations, nonetheless, they are important. And that's why I wanted to say that they are choosing to live among us today. So with that, please look online on Blackboard and look at the assignment. It's very clear. I give you a few steps, what to read. There's one section that has a couple of links to read. I've put the Smithsonian information on there to tell you what a land acknowledgement fully should be. And then we're asking you to write your own land acknowledgement. Another link you'll find on the assignment is a link to a site, a website that shows a map of the Western Hemisphere, and you put in your zip code that represents what you call home, wherever you grow up, or if you're from Houston, if you're from California, if you're from somewhere else, wherever you call home, put in your zip code or your country code or whatever is appropriate for you. and find your original homelands and look at the tribes that live there. It will show you what tribes were there. And so you're going to write your own land acknowledgement, and you're going to acknowledge the indigenous people that were on those lands before you, that held those lands for 10,000, 20,000 years, and were forced to give those over to colonizers and invaders that came to this continent. And so it's just a form of respect and a form of honor. But we want to know who was on your land and what you think about that. And at the end, the last sentence or paragraph should be a call to action that encourages others to acknowledge the indigenous people, maybe that either were on the lands where you grew up or even where they live today. And that's why my last sentence says we encourage others to connect with both this important past and with tribal citizens among us today. So it's just asking them to acknowledge. Some people ask others to support tribes in other ways, to reach out to tribes in their region, and even I've seen suggestions to offer financial or volunteer time. So there's all kinds of ideas, and we're interested in what you have to say. Now, it doesn't have to be long. I said approximately 50 to 80 words, might be a little longer. It doesn't have to be long. So send those through Turnitin, and we'll talk about those on Thursday. And again, we'll watch our email in case you have questions. So now we're going to go to the next portion of our lesson. And I was really hoping for time with you for this discussion, but I'll present the materials today, and we'll take up where I left off today and begin our discussion on Thursday. So let me go to our next section. We're going to talk about a very important part of Indigenous life, Indigenous paradigms, and ways of thinking and knowing. We talked about native knowledges as multiple knowledges and ways of thinking. So right now we're going to talk about the sacred and what does sacred mean. So as I go through this, we'll look at it from a tribal and multi-tribal perspective, because of course cultures vary from tribe to tribe, but we will just go through this. And I want you to think about what you think sacred means. If without looking at a dictionary or Wikipedia or something online, if you could write down the definition of sacred, what do you think that is? What does that mean to you? And it might have specific meanings for your religious tradition or faith tradition, or it just might mean what you've seen for practices for others. And it's all relative to the kind of experiences we've had as individuals. So there's no right or wrong answers, but we want to I am opening up the discussion because we're going to be talking about this through the entire semester. So this is just the beginning of those discussions. So I'm asking you all, what do you think sacred means? And so I'm going to just talk about some things we've already touched on lightly, but they are things that are sacred to many tribal people. And they might vary slightly from tribe to tribe, but for the most part, this is pretty consistent. So we all have sacred elements that are involved with ceremony. Let's use something obvious that maybe you all know about. In the Christian faith or the Catholic tradition, the sacred elements, for instance, might be the Eucharist or taking communion. Ceremonies might be feast days. In Native American tribal cultures, ceremony can be many, many things. Across the board, sacred fire is important to every tribe. And they all have, as you know, a lot of our storytelling comes down through oral tradition. And many origin stories are related to sacred fire. Many other stories from tribal life and tribal storytelling are related to sacred fire. There are ceremonies around the fire. There are stomp dances that involve the fire, many kinds of dances through different tribes. And probably, and I don't know if you remember this one, but when we talked about the 4 directions, the number 4 is so important as a sacred number. So for instance, it could mean the 4 directions, the cardinal directions are considered sacred. When they create a fire, they use the logs and they begin with a cross or an X, whichever you like, that points exactly in the 4 directions. And the smoke represents prayers rising to the creator or whatever name that a tribe gives a supreme entity or a divine being. And it's obviously different, you know, if you look at the, you know, there's probably 300 existing languages. We talked about 574 federally recognized tribes, many more tribes than that. And then sadly, only about 300 languages remain. It might be less than that now. But a lot of tribes have different names for the creator. We might have heard the Great Spirit, or I talked about the name from the Muskogee Creek tribe, my tribe. Ibafongo is one of them. And so the fire symbolizes carrying our prayers to our supreme being or God, if you want to use that term. Before I go out, leave that, we'll talk about fire more. We'll talk about smudging in days to come. We'll talk about cleansing rituals. We'll talk about ceremony, and we'll talk about coming of age ceremonies, which are really cool. We'll talk about a ceremony called a potlatch ceremony, which honors the ancestors and the people who died for the previous year, and also the giving of gifts. Giving of gifts is very ceremonial in tribal cultures. And also you may have also heard about bestowing a new name on somebody. A naming ceremony is very important. So we'll talk about that as well in another lesson. Just like fire as an element, water is considered sacred. The Dakota pipeline protests a couple of, well, I guess it'd be about 4 years ago, where they were trying to stop the oil pipeline from going across a river near tribal lands. It was big, and their motto was "Water is life." And it is life to all of us. Obviously, on the planet, we cannot live without water, without clean water, and water as a symbol of purity. In many, many religious traditions is consistent around the world, and also has many meanings. For instance, in some tribes, fire is considered like a masculine energy. And when people prepare for a ceremony or a dance, the men will build the fire. But water's considered a feminine energy, and women will be the water bearers. So they'll be the ones who gather the water and provide the water for the ceremony. and for the people. So water is considered very sacred. Another sacred space, if you want to use that term, is the sky or the cosmos. So as we've talked about before, cosmology was very important and to guide the lives of tribal people. If you can put yourself in their position 1,000 years ago, there's no distractions at night. There's nothing, no hindrances outside of weather or, tribal conflict or wild animals to distract from the beauty of the night sky, from the study of the stars, understanding cycles of the moon, and the importance of the sun. And so the cosmos is very important. These are all sacred elements. Again, the sun is considered a masculine energy or a masculine being. Some people call him grandfather sun, and as an entity that they relate to. Others refer to the moon as a feminine identity, because we all know that the gravity of the moon impacts a woman's monthly cycle, and then also the seasons in the earth, and our calendar revolves around that. And so the sun and the moon impact the seasons we move through in Mother Earth. The earth is considered a mother, and I know that that's not unusual to think of it in that terms. It's as a feminine identity. It gives a sense of nurturing, of creating abundance, of being life sustaining, of being part of our body. Our body is made of earth, and even, let's use water as another example. We're very much connected to water because such a high percentage of our bodies and our brains are water. And likewise, of course, we know we're made from earth. So earth as our sustainer. And another thing we'll talk about in days to come is the sacredness of place. I've created a picture here of something called Bear Butte in the Black Hills of Montana. It's a very sacred place to tribal people. And I'm going to include a reading for you on Thursday. I won't put it up this time tonight because I want you to really focus on the land acknowledgement for Thursday. But over the weekend, I have some reading that I will want you all to do related to sacred places. And so this is a very interesting place, and there's a reading that will be attached to that. So there are many sacred sites across the United States that were considered spiritual portals and sacred lands to tribal people, and places where they held ceremonies for thousands of years that were taken over by the United States, that they were forbidden by law to go and practice their ceremonies there. Some of that, of course, has been changed and modified, but a lot of these lands have been opened up to people, as you know, in the National Park Service. They're being desecrated. They're being objectified as, there for the glory of whoever the tourist is, and for their enjoyment, and they're truly not understanding what kind of space this is. So in our discussions, I want us to think about what sacred spaces and the importance of place in where we grow up, in our, how important land is to our people groups that we belong to, the many kinds of ethnicities that we have in class. and how wisdom, there's a beautiful book called Wisdom Sits in Places. And I might talk about that a little too in classes to come. Something that you may have also heard are that are sacred are plants to us. As we discussed in our last class, there is an acknowledgement of all living things, that within the energy of all living things is a spiritual component that can relate to us and we relate to. Tobacco is something that is considered sacred and is considered a plant that is, I don't know if you want to use the word holy, but something given by tribal people as offerings in spiritual ceremonies or religious ceremonies, and often as gifts to other people. It's offered to other people. There is a tribal custom where you offer tobacco to an individual because you are asking them to help you with something. And if they accept it, then that means that they're grateful and thank you, and I'm happy to support you and whatever you need me to do. Another some element that you find tobacco with is a medicine bag. Many tribal people wear something around their neck. It looks kind of small and square, and it's called a medicine bag. It might have tobacco in it. It might have other plant materials, but things that are considered sacred to that person, and they represent healing. They're involved in healing ceremonies, and tobacco is often used in healing ceremonies as well. And it can be used in a pipe. You've heard of smoking ceremonial pipes. It's said that often when it's smoked in a pipe for ceremonial use, it's not inhaled, as opposed to commercial tobacco. Commercial tobaccos, as we know, have many additives that are harmful and cause cancer and are addictive and have nicotine added to them purposefully for to create a nicotine addiction. And in this case, that's far from what tobacco is used for. Many times I've been in a place in homelands and in the Southeast where people offered tobacco because we had the privilege of being on the land. It was a way of acknowledging the ancestors and offering its gratitude. It's a symbol of gratitude. Cedar is another thing that is burned or offered as an offering. There are many kinds of cedars, as you know, across North America. The cedars that are in the southeast part of the United States are very different from what is in the Pacific Northwest. And so how they're used, for instance, totem poles are often made from cedar. But it's yellow cedar. It's a very different kind of wood. And the way it's handled, the parts, the bark, the fibers, the greenery, everything is different from tribe to tribe. So when people smudge for cleansing or for spiritual cleansing or cleansing atmospheres, which is burning tobacco or cedar, then this is very much a part of that ceremonial ritual. Also included in those same categories are the plants of sweetgrass and sage. So remember that people consider these very much a part of native lifeways. That burning of cedar or sweetgrass, you might have seen braided sweetgrass. It's this, they leave the roots and they take the stalks. You can see on the left, this is sweetgrass, and it has flowers, but when those dry, they braid them, and they have a wonderful aroma. a wonderful fragrance. And it really, they believe that the beautiful fragrance really has healing properties, aromatic properties that cause well-being for an individual. And then sage is also used, and it smells good as well. I like sage, it's just like sweetgrass. And uh, it is considered a sacred plant. I want to talk about foods for a minute. Food is so important to our culture, to every culture in the planet. Food is something that gives us sustenance, that makes us happy, that brings cohesion to families and tribal groups, community groups. It's something when we gather around the table, there's relationships that happen that can't happen and anywhere else. It's truly a connector. And something that's very important in multiple tribal cultures is, and you'll hear some stories about corn later, mother corn. But corn is a very important staple in Native communities, and it's also considered a sacred plant. And then beans and squash. The three of them are considered the three sisters, and that's because they're planted together. If you see the photo on the left, it was very purposeful and very efficient that they would plant the corn first, and as it began to get tall, then the beans were planted so that they could grow, and they would circle around the corn stalk. So the corn stalk would hold up the beans, and you know how beans spiral. And then the squash was planted because it's low growing and it has the broad leaves. And so it would be planted around the bottom of the corn. Here you see a group planted, but it could be in rows. And so the squash would be planted up and down the rows. And it was a natural weed barrier at two functions, as a weed barrier to keep the roots cool and keep the weeds from growing, but also to keep moisture in. So it held moisture into the soil, protected from too much sun, and kept the weeds back. So this was all a super way to have all the beautiful sustenance, the starchiness of corn, which gives you energy, the green beans, and it could be other kinds of beans that provide protein, and or the vitamins in a dark green vegetable, and then the yellow vegetable, which is an entirely different vitamin supplement group. So three sisters are considered a sacred part of our foods that we love to eat. It's super fun to have those. It's just a hearty meal, and obviously served with other foods, but very important to our culture. And then there's the animal kingdom. I am not purposefully leaving out fish or insects or anything else that's important to our world, but we've selected things that are often a part of storytelling and important sacred cultural icons, if you will. And I'm calling it an icon because you easily identify these things. On the left is the bison. We know the importance of the bison to the plains cultures, but they are considered sacred. When you slaughter a bison, it is not done lightly. It is with great gratitude, and they are honored and they're respected. And if you can say anything about things that are sacred, they are what is honored and what is respected. So turtles are another respected and honored animal that the story, I'll tell the story of why the earth is called Turtle Island. Well, North America, they really refer primarily to North America as Turtle Island. And there's an oral tradition about Turtle Island. And then Southeast cultures, for instance, we strapped turtle shells onto our legs. We would keep the shell and after the turtle had died, and put rocks inside and strapped them onto our legs. So the women would wear the turtle shells on their calves and dance and create the rhythm of the stomp dances. And the men, you can have a turtle shell as a rattle as well. The men usually had the rattles, and the women had the turtle shells on their legs, and they would dance around a fire typically all night. And so that's very ceremonial. And again, we're just beginning this discussion of what is sacred and what is ceremonial. All along during the semester, you'll hear specific examples from tribe to tribe. On the bottom right, you'll see two things that are very important to Native cultures, and they are both considered sacred. One is the eagle, and the other is the raven. So those are going to be some fun discussions, have some good storytelling with that, and we'll see those symbols throughout the tribal cultures. And as you're probably very familiar with the eagle feather as a symbol of honor, worn in headdresses or used as fans for dancing, or even when you smudge and you have the shell and you have the plants inside, then when the smoke comes up, you might use an eagle feather to spread the smoke as a symbol of cleansing. So eagles and ravens. And that brings us to people. The sacredness of relationship. As we began our course, we talked about, and I talked about this last Thursday, everything is centered on relationships. You're going to often hear tribal people say the phrase, all my relations. So they're not just talking about their families or their tribe. They're talking about all Indigenous people as their relations. They're talking about all animals. They're talking about plants as their relations. They might be talking about water or the cosmos, the sky, the moon, or, you know, what is sacred to that person. When you say all my relations, you're saying all that is dear to me, and those that have life and bring life. And so I included some really interesting photography here. And in our class, if you looked at our class as a cultural group, we would say, even though we're all from different places and have different, you know, family groups, etc., but we could look at one another and say, you know, you are all my relations. These are my relations. That there's no difference between you and me. And that's what I love about Native American culture, is it breaks down division. It breaks down the idea of separation or separateness. And it also is a big conceptual myth buster about duality. So we learn a lot in Western thinking about duality, good, bad, holy, evil, black, white, opposites, north, south. But in Native ways of thinking, these dualities aren't separate, but they work together. And so they are, in everybody's life comes joy and suffering. In everybody's life comes pain or happiness. In everybody's life comes good and bad. And so it's not like they're not polarized. There's not a polarized thinking. In tribal cultures, there's no bipartisan politics. And so, I'm just throwing terms out there that are familiar to all of us so that we can begin to think outside of American culture. Now, those of you who come from outside of America, it will be easier, or maybe your thinking is somewhat like that, but more open and not so rigid. So often Western thinking is rigid. And so I'm introducing new ways of thinking about something that is important to all of us, but maybe we've just never thought of it in this vein. So I thank you for your time and attention. I think that's the last slide, except for two things. I want to give you a couple of thoughts from my friend Erin Shaw. And I'm including these because we have moments in our life that are sacred. So she shared a sacred moment with me, and I'm sharing it with you. So she said, everything made bears the image of the Creator. Wisdom, modalities, solutions exist within every created thing, if we have the eyes to see. For example, last week I was on a bike ride on Monday. I crossed over a river and it looked crazy different in just 2 days' time. There's wisdom in that. I heard, and when she says I heard, she means she heard within herself. No matter what your life looks like, today it's passing. Everything changes. Cycles of life and death are constantly playing themselves out before our eyes. As I was finishing my ride, I was struck with the cycles of life and death in every created ecosystem out there, and how strange it is that we as humans would think we are immune to that same cycle. So when she says cycles of life and death, it's a reference in a large uh, idea that, just as winter is considered a cycle of dormancy and death, and spring is new life, and that everything has these cycles of death and life. Even in our lives, we leave one place and we start essentially a new life when we move somewhere else. And so this was a sacred moment for Erin, just a small moment. And we all have these revelations that come to us along the way, where our understanding is open to just new things. So just to compare those two photos, this is what the river looked like on Monday. And 2 days later, it was a rushing river like that. So things change, and we change with them. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts on what is sacred on Thursday. So we'll stop here, and I will let you all focus on your land acknowledgement and getting that assignment in. And then we'll take up on Thursday with your responses to the sacred presentation. And then we'll do an introduction to Texas tribes. All right, you guys, have a good evening. Thanks so much. See you Thursday.